Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into this video. You're right, it's Mrs. McClure. Hope you weren't expecting anything too fancy. This last section that we need to talk about for class involves systems of inequalities, since we've been focusing on systems of two equations. So before we did that, I just wanted you guys to watch a short video. Hopefully you've downloaded the worksheet from Edline, or you've picked it up from me in class on Tuesday. We're going to work through some of it together. Some of it you'll get time to do during the video, and then a few questions you'll have to do on your own. So let's go ahead and get started. So this should all be a review from the very end of chapter 6, when we first started graphing one linear inequality. So the first thing that we always do when we're testing equations and inequalities is to make sure that we know how to check to see if an answer or a point that we were getting was actually a solution, right, and would be a correct answer. So for 1, 2, and 3 of our worksheet, all we need to do is check to see if the ordered pair is a solution to the inequality that they give us. Right? We know our ordered pairs have an x and a y value. Our inequalities have an x and a y variable in them. We know what to do. We take our values, right, for our x and for our y, so I'll just do the first one. Right? We take x as 0 and y as 0, and then we substitute them in for our inequality. So I'm going to plug in x as 0 plus y as 0, and that's supposed to be greater than -9, right? So we just simplify and we make the comparison. So 0 plus 0 is 0, and is that bigger than -9? Yeah, of course it is, right? We know that 0 is always bigger than negative numbers. So all we have to write is that it is a solution. So these are all yes or no questions. Yes if it's a solution, right? No if it's not. So now I want you to take just a couple of seconds here and try to do number 2, right? Make sure that we know which numbers are x value, which ones are y value, plug them in, and then take some time to just simplify. Okay, that surely shouldn't have been too bad. Right? We know that number 2 is not a solution. Right? 14 minus 9 is 5. 5 is nowhere near greater than or equal to 8. Right? Number 3 is left for you to work on your own. Okay, second thing that we need to work on is graphing our inequalities. So every time that we need to graph a line, right, what do we always do? The first step is to make sure that we have our y solved for itself, right? So the y has to be the only thing left on the left-hand side before we're allowed to get started. So we've got 10, 11, and 12 here. I'm just going to choose number 11, right? I will do the one in the middle. So we always have two steps when we're solving an equation or an inequality for y, right? The first step is always move the x. So how are we going to move that x term over to the right-hand side? If you said subtract it, you're right. It is positive on the left-hand side, so we're going to subtract it. Right? That's going to move it over to the right-hand side. That's always our first step. Right? Second step is always, if we need to divide to get the y completely alone. So we have a negative y, and we want a positive, so I'm going to divide both sides of this inequality by -1. Okay, so I get a y on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, -4 divided by -1 is +4. And then a negative x divided by -1 becomes a positive, so I'm going to add x. Right. I didn't write my inequality sign, and you might be wondering how come. Right. Hopefully you think all the way back through the last chapter and you remember when we multiply or divide by a negative number, our inequality sign flips, right, and turns the other way around. Okay, so the first thing that you guys are going to have to do on number 10 and number 12 is to make sure that we can get that y to be completely by itself on the left-hand side. Right? The second thing we do is to start graphing. So now that we have our inequality in slope-intercept form, I want to start with the y-intercept. Right? Our y-intercept is always the number that's by itself, so that's 4. And my graph goes by 2's, so I need to start up here at 4 on the y-axis. Right? The second thing we do is we use the slope. The slope is always the number in front of the x, so we know that there's 1x. So our slope is 1 over 1. And that means that to get to our next point on our graph, we can go up 1 unit and over to the right 1 unit. That means I'm going to put my next point here. Right? Technically, I'm going up 2 and over 2, but we know 2 over 2 is the same as 1 over 1. So I'm going to do that a few times so that I have some points. I'm going to go up and to the right, and I'll go down and to the left. And then here's the part where we need to remember way back into chapter 6 when we were graphing linear inequalities. So before I connect my points, I have to ask myself a few questions, right? The first question is, am I going to connect my points with a dotted line or with a solid line? So to answer that question, we have to take a look at our inequality sign. So I see that y is less than 4 plus x, and I remember that less than or greater than signs, that meant to be an open circle when we were graphing our inequalities on our number lines, and an open circle is the same as a dotted line. It's our way of trying to open up the line. Right? So again, open lines are dotted, therefore less than or greater than symbols. And then the second thing that we had to decide is where we were going to shade, if we were going to shade above the line or below the line. Again, I take a look down here, y is less than, right? So if we want smaller numbers, that's going to be below our line. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shade this entire area that's below my dotted line. Right, so again, for you in number 10 and number 12, you need to first solve the inequality so that y is by itself on the left-hand side. Then we need to start graphing our points using our y-intercept first, and then taking the slope and using that to move to get to my second and third points. Then we have to look to see if we're using a dotted line or a solid line, and if we're shading above or below. Right, this third section is just like the second one. We need to graph our inequalities, but 19, 20, and 21 are actually a little bit simpler because our inequalities only involve either a y variable or an x variable by themselves. So this is just remembering kind of which way our extreme lines go. So in 19, we have y is greater than 7. Right, so I always say in class, where does it make sense to start this line? And normally everyone says, well, of course, we'd start it on the 7, right, on our y-axis. But now we don't have a slope, right? We don't have an x variable that's in our inequality, so we have to decide which way our line is going to go. So can you remember which direction our line goes in? It should be horizontal, right? Our lines have to go through the axis that we've started on. So if we want to cut through the y-axis, we have to be going from left to right. But before I draw my line, right, let me peer back over here, right, y is greater than, and we just finished saying that greater than symbols were dotted lines. So I'm going to make a horizontal dotted line, and that's going to represent, right, that y is 7. And then again, we have to decide if we're going to shade above or below the line. Right, once again, y has to be greater than 7, so I'm going to shade above the line, right? Bigger numbers are always above. So think about what that means. So 21 should look very similar to number 19, but 20, right, now that I have an x variable instead of my y variable, my line should be going in a different direction. So again, I'm actually going to give you just about a minute here during this video for you to work on 20 and 21. Okay, plenty of time. Hopefully you've got 20 and 21 ready to go, and we only have 2 more questions and then we are finished going through this worksheet. And so the last things that we have to remember how to do, right, is how to write an inequality if the graph is already drawn. So we're going to be going backwards here. So what we want to do is we want to do everything in the opposite direction that we just did. So first we solve for y, then we plotted the intercept, then we used the slope, then we figured out, right, if it was dotted or solid or where it was shaded. We want to do those kind of same steps, but in the reverse order. Right? So I'm going to start with 22. We're going to do 22 together. Right? So I'm going to put my y here. I want to make sure that my inequality is written in slope-intercept form, so I know I have a y. And then the first things I need to look at in my graph is where my graph is shaded and what kind of line is drawn. So what I notice in 22 is that it's a solid line and that the graph is shaded above the line. Right, everything that's above, and I can tell because again they give me points. If I would draw an arrow up from one of the points, I'm in the shaded area. So again, it's above the line, so I know that y has to be greater than, right, bigger y's are above my line. And because this time it's solid, not like the other examples where we had dotted lines, I'm going to put an equal to. So y has to be greater than or equal to whatever my right hand side is. So that's how I'm going to start, and then right, second thing is to figure out the slope and the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is easy because they give it to me. So the y-intercept is just 4. And then I need to find my slope. So I need to figure out, right, how my line is changing over time. So what I know is that my line's decreasing when I look at it from left to right. So that means my slope's going to be negative, so I'm going to put a minus sign. And then I have gone down 1, 2, 3, 4 units, and I've gone over to the right 4 units. 4 over 4, that's just 1. So I have y is greater than or equal to 4 minus 1x, right? 4 representing my y-intercept, the negative 1 representing my slope, right? Again, you want to do the same thing in number 23. Start out with your y. We know that's going to be the first part of our inequality. Then evaluate, is it a dotted line? Is it a solid line? Is it shaded above or below? Right? Those two things are going to tell you which way your inequality symbol should go and if it's an equals to or not. And then use the slope and the y-intercept to finish writing your inequality. Okay. So what we're going to do now, right, is I'm just going to kind of cut off here. I'm going to pause my video. You pause your video. Give yourself some time to work through everything, see how you're doing, and then in 5-10 minutes, however long it takes you to finish up your worksheet, check back here and you'll be able to scroll right back through the whole video and check to see if your answers match mine. Okay, warning! Don't look at this if you have not yet tried to finish working through this worksheet on your own. So I'm going to slowly scroll through, have you compare your answers to mine. I've got all of my work shown so that you guys can come in on Wednesday. Let me know if there's any questions because we're going to start figuring out how to do these same steps, right, when we have 2 inequalities instead of 1. So again, we have to make sure that we're evaluating, right, that we know how to solve our inequalities for y, if we're using dotted or solid lines correctly, right, and whether we shade above or below our lines. 19 through 21, we've got some extreme cases, right, with just one variable, our lines are either vertical or horizontal. So just make sure that you're finding the right number on your x and y axis, right, that your lines are going in the right direction. And in number 20, right, it's the only time that we shade either to the left or to the right, since we can't shade above or below a vertical line. And then last one for you to check. Okay, awesome. I'm going to sign off. I'll see you guys in class. Feel free to watch this video as many times as you need to make sure that you feel comfortable, right, going back through and reviewing all of this material. See you later.